Hello, I'm Tiffany Cloud, and welcome to a special half-hour commercial-free episode of The Storm. I'm so pleased to be joined today by the Honorable Judy Olson. She's a Republican candidate for Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Your Honor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Tiffany.
Happy to have you, and I'm looking forward to our audience getting to know you a bit better.
As am I. Thank you.
We're going to start with the basics and just have you tell the audience a bit about your background. So if you could share a bit about where you grew up and where you went to school.
Absolutely. I hail from Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in Pittsburgh and then moved to the suburbs of Pittsburgh. And after I graduated from high school, I ventured out east to Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania, and spent a year and a half there, and then transferred to be closer to home, and so went back to Cambria County near Johnstown to what was then St. Francis College, now St. Francis University.
Okay.
I graduated from St. Francis University and then went to Duquesne University School of Law, where I graduated and then went into practice.
And what was the impetus for getting into the law? What sparked your interest in the law?
You know, that's a great question, Tiffany, because I don't know. I just remember in 5th grade we had to write a paper. What do you want to be when you grow up? And of course, in my era, a lot of the girls were writing about wanting to become teachers or nurses. And I wrote that I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And it was funny because I have no lawyers in my family. Never watched Perry Mason. I think it was from reading, but it was something I knew from a very early age I wanted to do, and I set my sights on it, and that's what I did.
Oh, that's always a lucky thing when you know when you're young what you want to be when you grow up. I'm still trying to figure it out. So
well, there are days I am too.
Well, so then you attended law school. You graduated from law school. Tell us about your first work in the legal field.
I was very fortunate. I was hired to serve as a law clerk to a federal trial judge, Judge Maurice Cohill. He was on the United States, or he still is on the United States District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. And I worked with him, and I can't think of a better way to start a career. If you called Central Casting and said, get me the perfect judge, they would give you Judge Cohill. He looked like a judge, and he still does. He's so fair and kind and intelligent and thoughtful, and I learned so much from him, and it was from working with him that I knew at some point in my career I would like to follow in his footsteps and give back to the community as a judge.
That's nice when your very first employer, if you will, is someone who's so inspirational.
I was very, very fortunate. He truly has been an inspiration and a wonderful mentor, and much of what I've learned as both a lawyer and a judge was from the years I spent with Judge Cohill.
So when you were practicing under him, and certainly as you continued on in your career, were there particular areas of the law that tended to be your focus?
I knew I wanted to be in a courtroom. I knew I wasn't cut out to be a transactional lawyer that did business deals or a tax lawyer or anything of that nature. I knew I wanted to advocate. And so the best thing about being a law clerk for a trial judge is you get to see different things. I saw criminal cases, I saw complex civil cases. I had the opportunity to see very good lawyers doing very different things. So it was through that experience that I knew I wanted to be in a courtroom. I wasn't going to be leaning toward criminal law, so I knew it was some type of civil law. And one of the lawyers that tried a very lengthy case in front of Judge Cohill did very complex civil cases like antitrust, securities fraud, those types of things. And I admired him, and at the end of my clerkship, he asked me to interview with him and his law firm, and I was fortunate enough to be hired and spent 14 wonderful years working with him.
Okay, so you just answered my next question. So that's where you went afterwards? So
I went to a law firm in Pittsburgh called Dickey, McCamey & Chilcote, a very respected firm throughout Pennsylvania, and I worked in the area of complex commercial litigation, though I did other things. I did medical malpractice work, I did personal injury work, but I focused on the complex commercial cases, which gave me the opportunity to be with wonderful lawyers throughout the United States in courtrooms, and gave me wonderful experience. And I spent 14 great years at Dickey McCamey, and then a group of us decided to go off on our own.
Okay.
And I ventured off with a group, and we started our own firm, and then after a few years, a portion of that group decided that we wanted to move on. So I joined the firm in the year of 2000 of Schneider, Harrison, Siegel, and Lewis. They have a Pittsburgh office, but they are based in Philadelphia as well as other cities in the United States. And I worked there, again, doing commercial litigation. Very honored to be the person that was responsible for all litigation in Pittsburgh, as well as the chair of the antitrust group for the entire firm. And I was there practicing until I went on the bench.
Well, and there you go. So, and that's
there
what
we are.
So you have this very impressive legal career, very impressive legal background, having worked and clerked for people, working for various firms, having your own firm where I'm sure you're not only practicing law, if you have your own firm, you're having to also manage a lot fiscally and have a lot of fiscal responsibility.
Exactly.
So what was the moment that you said, okay, no more being an attorney, I am going to run for judge, and tell the audience about that?
Well, I had applied and got very close to being appointed to the federal bench in Pittsburgh. In fact, I had the pleasure of going to the White House to be interviewed. Unfortunately, I was not the nominee that was selected, but through that experience, I knew at some point, yes, this is what I want to do. I had no intention of running because I always thought, oh, I don't know if I could do that. But I was asked, there was an opening on the Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County, the trial court, and I was asked, would you be interested in filling that seat, and with the understanding you're going to have to run to keep it. And I thought long and hard, and I talked to my family and talked to trusted advisors and said, you know, I think this might be the right thing to do. So I was fortunate enough to be nominated by the governor and unanimously confirmed by the Senate. And I was planning to run to keep my seat on the Court of Common Pleas. And then people came to me and said, you know, at that time there were 3 seats on the Superior Court of Pennsylvania, the Intermediate Appellate Court, right below the Supreme Court. That might be a perfect fit for you because of your broad experience, and what you could bring to that might be something that others don't have the same background, so it would be beneficial for you to think about it. So I did. And I decided, what could I lose? I knew that if I weren't elected, I could practice law again.
Sure.
So I said, okay, let's do it. And I think the best thing, Tiffany, was I didn't know what to expect. And I jumped in blindly, which was wonderful because it was kind of like
You're not going to be disappointed if you have no expectations.
Exactly.
Sure.
I didn't know what to expect. And my husband and I became a team. He was my manager, my driver, my drill sergeant, my therapist, and we worked very hard in 2009. And at that time, there were 7 seats on the statewide appellate courts, from the Supreme Court to the Superior to the Commonwealth Court. And there were 15 candidates running for the 7 seats, and I was very surprised but very honored to have been the top vote getter of all 15. And I credit that to a lot of hard work, getting around the state, having a wonderful partner with my husband. We were a team. Our children were invested in it, and everybody pulled together, and I was so blessed to be elected.
Well, and it's interesting, this election cycle, I don't have a law degree, and I've gotten quite an education about the Superior Court. And a lot of people don't realize, and I've been working to educate the viewers, how many appellate cases are heard. The Pennsylvania Superior Court is one of the busiest courts in the entire nation.
Correct.
In fact, I think it may be the busiest.
I've heard that it is, if not, but it's certainly one of the busiest courts. We decide about 8,000 appeals a year, and each judge writes about 275, 300 decisions a year. That's a lot of work. And very important cases. And the wonderful thing about the Superior Court is we have such a broad jurisdiction that we hear appeals from all areas of law. From criminal cases, all of the criminal appeals come to us except the death penalty. If somebody is given the death penalty, that appeal goes directly to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
But we hear all the other appeals, and we hear most of the civil cases, the personal injury, malpractice, breach of contract, the family law cases, which are so important when you're dealing with children in custody, and the juvenile cases, again, very, very important because you're dealing with young people. And we hear those appeals, and we're very efficient and work very hard to get decisions out, because justice delayed, of course, is no justice at all.
So certainly with how busy you've been over the last several years,
Yes.
And the breadth of experience I would imagine that one would get sitting on the Pennsylvania Superior Court, what was the moment that you decided, I am going to now make the next move in my career on the bench and run for Pennsylvania Supreme Court?
I had no intention to run for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Okay.
I like my job. I am happy doing what I do. I think the Superior Court is a very important court for most cases. It's the court of last resort. But at the end of 2014, people came to me, including lawyers and community leaders, and they said, this race is critical. We have 3 out of 7 seats open on the Supreme Court. We haven't had that since the 1700s, and of course at that time those seats were filled by the Crown.
Yes.
The King made the appointment. This is the first time Pennsylvanians are going to elect 3 Supreme Court justices, and with only 7 justices, that's is a big deal. And they came to me and said, you have the experience, and I was also very honored that they would think that, but more honored because they said, you have the integrity, you have the reputation of being fair and impartial, you have the temperament that we need on the Supreme Court. Would you consider running?
Okay.
And I really gave it a lot of thought, because I knew it would be a commitment, and I wanted to make sure that if I were going to have my family go through this again, that it was the right thing. So again, I counseled with people I trusted, my family, my husband, my colleagues that I work with, and I said, you know, this is critical, and it's important that we have people step up and be willing to put themselves out there, because the future of our courts are at stake. And when you look at the scandals that we've had, not only at the Supreme Court, who knows it better than the people of Luzerne County?
Absolutely, yes. We're sadly very familiar.
Sadly very familiar. We need to stop, and we need to once again instill faith in the judiciary.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I do think that probably the voters of Luzerne County are a bit more mindful in terms of vetting candidates, I would imagine, because of what we've gone through. But, you know, typically, for judicial races, you know, when somebody's running for Senate or Congress, you know, people really vet, they really follow. For judge, a lot of times people don't even know. Exactly. But as you point out, this is so very important. There are so many important issues at stake.
That's right.
So I'm glad that you've come on so that people can learn a bit about
you.
And
I'm glad you make the effort to give the opportunity for the candidates to talk about it, because you're right, Tiffany. I've talked to voters now for almost 10 months, and what I tell them is, you think courts may not be that important to you because you're law-abiding, you don't go into court, you don't understand why this should be of critical importance to you. And I remind them, look at what the United States Supreme Court did at the end of this last term. When they decided the Affordable Care Act case, the same-sex marriage case, whether you agree or disagree with what they did, the takeaway should be that 9 men in black robes, 9 men and women in black robes, made decisions that impacted all Americans.
Absolutely.
And the same thing happens with the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. 7 men and women in black robes make decisions that impact all Pennsylvanians. That's why people need to care.
Absolutely. I looked on your website, which we'll be pulling up throughout the show, and I saw a quote from Socrates. I was very impressed you had a quote from Socrates.
That?
And it says, 4 things belong to a judge: to hear courteously, to answer wisely, to consider soberly, and to decide impartially. I'd like you to tell the audience a bit about your judicial philosophy.
Sure. That could not be more succinctly or more clearly said, so that's why I put it on my website, and I assumed Socrates would not mind that I took his writing and put it on my website. My judicial philosophy is simple. It follows 2 prongs. First, my philosophy and belief is that our founding fathers were brilliant. They created a system of 3 separate but co-equal branches of government, and to the judiciary, they gave them the charge to interpret the law, not to create the law, not to be a super legislator, not to be out there advocating for one constituency or another. The job of a judge is to strictly interpret the law in accordance with the words of the Constitution and the statutes as passed by our legislature. That's the first prong. The second prong of my philosophy is respect. I believe that as a judge, you must respect the parties, respect the litigants. On the appellate court, it's so important to respect your colleagues because you work as a group. You have to try to reach consensus to give guidance as to what the law is. And if you can't agree, you need to respectfully disagree with each other. And most importantly, respect for the rule of law and for the system. This system, our court, especially our Supreme Court, is the oldest court in the United States of America, older than the United States Supreme Court. It has been here for years before us, and it will be here years after us. We need to remember that, and that we must respect the entire system and the rule of law. If you follow that philosophy and remember what your role is as a judge, I think that's the best way to make decisions.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because as you brought up before, for example, from a federal standpoint, how some major decisions as related to health care, et cetera, have been made by the federal Supreme Court. You know, there are those people out there, and I'm admittedly one of those people who have felt, though, there has been a bit of legislation from the bench at certain levels. And so hearing you say that it's very important to you that you do not legislate from the bench as a judge, I think that's something that the people need to know that you believe in very strongly.
Very strongly. And as a judge on the Superior Court, there are times where I may not agree with what the law is, but I wasn't elected by the people to pass the legislation. So I must apply the law as written. Or if the law is wrong, if there is a problem with the law, my job isn't to say, all right, I'm going to change it this way. My job is to tell the legislature, here's the problem. Here's why we need to revisit it. And that's your job because that's why you were elected.
Sure.
And it's also important to remind voters that legislators are elected for 2 or 4 years. Your governor's elected for 4 years. If you don't like what the people in those 2 branches of government are doing, you can get rid of them
pretty quickly. Yes, not a judge.
Judge is 10 years.
Yes.
And then you don't run to keep. You don't run against someone to keep your seat. You just run for retention, which is voters say yes, keep them, or no, get rid of them. So what a judge does can last much longer.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point.
Very important.
Multiple administrations of other.
Exactly.
I'd like to ask where you stand on a couple key issues that matter to many Pennsylvanians. I'd like to hear a bit about your position on Pennsylvania voter ID.
Well, you know, one of the things we as judges do is take an oath to uphold the laws and to follow the Code of Judicial Conduct. Under our Code of Judicial Conduct, we are prohibited from talking about issues that could potentially come before us.
Okay.
And that is an issue that, if I'm fortunate enough to be on the Supreme Court, may in the future come before us. Because right now that law has been declared unconstitutional, but there are other states that have found differently. And it would not surprise me if at some point somebody tries to resurrect a revised voter ID law, which could then once again be challenged. And if I'm fortunate enough to be on the Supreme Court, that issue could come before me.
That's a fair answer. And of course, the Second Amendment.
Well,
because that's a big one in Pennsylvania,
it sure
too,
is.
because
and
a lot of people, it gets...
I grew up with a family of hunters. I grew up with a family of gun owners. The Second Amendment, like every other amendment in the Constitution of the United States and the equivalent in the Pennsylvania Constitution, is a right that as a judge I take an oath to uphold. And I am just as committed to upholding people's rights under the Second Amendment as I am any other amendment. And I would love to be a hunter if they would figure out how to do it when the weather was warm.
I'm with you there, because I've been in a deer blind in cold weather, and it's no fun. I don't understand.
I'll shoot skeet because that's in the warm weather, but my daughter and my husband, they traipse out into the cold.
Yeah, well,
God bless them.
Yes, yes, yes. I'd love to shift gears a little bit and talk a bit about the groups that are endorsing and backing your candidacy, because you certainly have a lot of them and a pretty broad scope of organizations.
I do, and I'm very fortunate. I have, as of endorsements still keep coming in. We haven't yet heard from all organizations, but I am very fortunate to, first and foremost, I was endorsed by the Republican Party before the primary, and have continued to have the support of the Pennsylvania Republican Party. I have been endorsed by various business organizations, including the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, the Association of Builders and Contractors, the PEGPAC, which is a group of businesses from all over the Commonwealth, and the Pennsylvania Medical Society has endorsed me. On a different front, I have been endorsed by the Pennsylvania State Troopers. I have the support of members of the Fraternal Order of Police, and I have the support of Firearm Owners Against Crime, which is an organization that works to protect rights under the Second Amendment.
Okay.
And I, on a personal level, I have the endorsement of Senator Pat Toomey, and the endorsements of the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation, and trying to think.
There were a lot, so I think
I covered a lot of
them.
There were I'm sure I may have missed some, but I'm very honored to have the support of businesses and law enforcement.
I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us what would be maybe your top 2 to 3 priorities if elected.
Number one, instilling integrity and faith in our judiciary once again. And that only starts with each individual person. You must make sure you have your own house in order before you can start criticizing others. And so I believe that whoever the voters select in November, the 3 new justices, and hopefully I'm one that they find worthy, those 3 people need to set their sights on immediately, once again, instilling faith and integrity on our courts. That would be first and foremost. Second of all, I think we need to start focusing on doing the work of the people that the Supreme Court's charged with doing, and that is giving guidance on very important legal issues. Sometimes I think our justices have gotten distracted by other things, and so I think it's very important that we again put the focus on giving guidance on very important legal issues, and working together. Let's stop the turmoil that's been on the Supreme Court. As I said, hearkening back to what I said earlier, respect. It doesn't mean I have to always agree with you, but I can disagree in a way that is respectful and benefits the people that need to get guidance on what the law is.
Okay. All of judges I've ever interviewed, you're so polite in dealing with one another. Unlike congressional campaigns and senatorial campaigns, it's always very honorable, which is refreshing. Tell us, though, if you can outline why you believe you may be more qualified to be on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Well, and I know you're going to say you're just being polite, but I have to say that the men and women that I'm running with and against, or however you want to put it, is an august body. It really is. But I think I am uniquely qualified for a couple of reasons. You heard my background. I have a very extensive background. I was a trial lawyer for over 25 years. I represented real people with real problems. I never forget what it's like to be on the other side and the importance of advocates. And so I have been a trial lawyer, and I have been a trial judge. So it's sort of that front line where you're really, you know, in the trenches working at that level. And then I've been very fortunate to sort of be behind the front doing the strategic, analytical, legal analysis that an appellate judge is required to do. And I don't think anything prepares you like the Superior Court for the Supreme Court because of the broad base.
Sure.
I also, as you pointed out earlier, as a partner in a law firm, I have administrative experience.
Yes.
And we have to remember that our Supreme Court oversees the entire judicial system of Pennsylvania. They do the administrative work as well. So I think that's an important skill set that I can bring. And finally, I think it's not only professional experience, but it's life experiences as well. I think you need to have, you know, those wonderful achievements and those abject failures as both a professional and as a mom and as a wife and as a daughter. And I think those life experiences give you a much better appreciation and respect for what comes before you. And working in communities, I've done a lot of charitable and community work. I believe to those whom much is given, much is expected in return. And being able to work with different people with different backgrounds, different walks of life on very difficult issues.
Yes. Tell us about some of that specific charity work.
Certainly.
I know a lot of the Heart Association you're very involved with.
Yes, my husband and I were blessed with a wonderful daughter who was born with very severe heart defects and in fact has had multiple open heart surgeries, and I'm proud to say she's now going to be 22 and a senior in college.
That makes me happy.
But we have really devoted a lot of time to the American Heart Association because we know the great work that they did is the reason our daughter is alive. Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, where my daughter lived for basically the first year of her life.
Yes, of course.
And my church. We're very active in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. My husband is an ordained deacon in the Catholic Church, so we we spend time doing that as well.
Well, we only have about 30 seconds left. I know you're on Facebook.
I am.
We've been pulling up your website. Is there anything that you'd like to close and just appeal to the people?
I would just ask you to please go on my website, electjudgejudy.com, learn about me, and take the time on November 3rd to go out and vote. And my son would kill me if I didn't tell you, you can also follow me on Instagram.
You're hipper than I am. I'm not on there yet.
Well, that helps to have a kid.
I wish you the very best in the upcoming November 3rd election. It was a pleasure meeting you. And remember, folks, when you look around and you don't like what you see, don't complain about it. You can do something about it. You can vote. And thank you for watching.